Hey everybody, this is Allan Ting, TEDx speaker, #1 bestselling author, and welcome to another edition of Expert Serious Interviews. And today's topic, it's all about, is self-care being selfish? You know, a lot of parents out there are like, I want to give so much for my kids and I want to sacrifice, I want to give so much and, I want to give them best to them. And oftentimes what happens is at the end of the day or at the end of the month or at the end of the year, we're like, man, I feel kind of beat up. I feel like exhausted and I don't know how much longer I can go on. This is why the reason why I brought one of my favorite topics, also one of my favorite authors, Jeremy Cortez. He's a best-selling author, a keynote speaker, a serial entrepreneur, and a proud parent of 2 growing boys. Now, he supports and trains other parents with special needs children with time management and self-management strategies. And I just thought, you know what, we got to bring him on board because this is a very much needed topic, especially for parents. Not just on the parenting side, Jeremy also does on the business side. He's currently consults with clients, ranging from solopreneurs to Fortune 500 companies, and including Johnson & Johnson, LinkedIn, and BlackRock, and so many accolades about Jeremy. I just can't stop talking about them. So welcome, Jeremy, to our show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
So let's just dive right into it. What is self-management, and share with us what that is?
I grew up in the personal development space, and the biggest word that's been kind of floating around is self-help. After a certain point, I've come to this conclusion that we don't need more help. We need more skills in how we manage ourselves. More information is not necessarily going to help us. It's now just going to put the knowledge into action. And so the concept of self-management is very simple. Once you hear it, it kind of makes sense. It's the ability to manage self. We may be great at managing other people, managing our kids, our loved ones, but for some reason I've found that as parents, we usually think about ourselves less, and we usually think that we'll just kind of figure it out as we go along. But I have concluded for myself, the people that I've worked with, they've kind of came to the same conclusion as well, that the ability to manage yourself, your time, your energy, your focus, your priorities, your boundaries, that ability actually spills over into everything else. The saying goes, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so if it starts with yourself, able to create boundaries, that spills over into how you do anything else with your kids, at work, etc.
But it's so much easier to work on other people's problem, isn't it?
It's Solomon's paradox, right? It's I'm great at giving other people advice, but I'm terrible at taking my own. It is a skill that we weren't necessarily taught as kids, which is to look at ourselves, to be honest with ourselves, to be honest with our shortcomings, and having the courage, for lack of a better term, to address them and saying, I'm actually not good at this. And that's okay. Every master was once a disaster. And so it's okay for me to not know. But now that I know that I don't know, can I take on the responsibility of actually getting better at on the blank?
Yeah, tell us more about that, because I'm really intrigued about we kind of know the answer, but we don't take the action, right? So knowledge is not enough. You got to turn knowledge into action. So, and then we talked about the Solomon paradox, like why it's easier to give us advice. And then you talked about how we grew up and how it really formed us. So can you talk more about that, elaborate more about that?
Well, I heard this quote by Chris Williamson. It was the Doing the Thing essay. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's so phenomenal. I'll read a little bit of it. It's like, preparing to do the thing is not doing the thing. Scheduling time to do the thing is not doing the thing. Making a to-do list for doing the thing is not doing the thing. Telling people you're going to do the thing is not doing the thing. And I'll add to that learning about how to do the thing is not doing the thing. And I was obsessed for years that my biggest challenge was that I didn't know how to do it. Well, there's only so much knowledge that you can consume before application is necessary in order for you to actually have it. I run into people all the time that say, oh, I know that. And I kind of look at them and I say, with all due respect, your reality is not showing me that you know it. You know of it. And so our ability to do the thing is actually the thing. It's the missing link. It's not extra knowledge. It's not the support group. It's what will it take for you just to take action? Good, bad, or indifferent. Don't try. You either do it or you fail. Either way, you are doing the thing. That's been my focus ever since I started this intention of wanting to support parents. It's, oh, I know that. Okay, well, why aren't you doing it? What excuse, what story, what roadblock is preventing you from doing the thing? And so the knowledge is not enough, because knowledge is information that affects behavior, right? It's like there's data and then there's knowledge. Knowledge is the ability to take data and then change your behavior along the way. And so if our behavior doesn't change, then we haven't obtained any knowledge. We've only obtained data. Again, my focus is how do we get more parents to take more action intentionally versus reacting to whatever life gives to us.
And as you're talking more about this, I mean, you and I both know that, especially when we talk about excuses and roadblocks and things like that. And the concepts start forming around shame and perfection, right? It's when they first start walking, just like every other kid, when they walk, they fall. What do? Yay, stand up, like keep going. Amazingly, most they walk, right? But as adults, we learn something new and then we fall, we stumble, a disaster. I like that quote. I love that quote you mentioned. Masters are first disasters. Is that what you said? Yeah. Tried it once, we have this full blown disaster. I'm like, yeah, that's not for me. I'm not talented. Oh, that's not meant for me. That's for somebody else. And then the concept is around shame and just perfection. I think maybe that's probably the rudimentary, the denominator of all of this. Can you talk more about that?
I stumbled, and I'm not going to take full credit to this because one of my friends gifted me with this observation. But there is an underlying belief that we are given as parents that we may not even understand or realize that we have. And it's that if we admit that we need help as parents, or if we are struggling as parents, we are labeled by ourselves and or the thought or belief of others that we are bad parents. So we're kind of starting at a negative, where if I admit that I'm struggling, if I admit that I need help, I must be a bad parent. And so therefore it prevents us from actually seeking the help, seeking the information, seeking the support to becoming a great parent. And that's the biggest challenge right now, this shame and guilt that we're bad parents because we've never done this before. We've never walked before. And so because we've never walked and we tried it once and we fall, we must be terrible walkers. Well, this is the exact thought process that we have subconsciously as parents. If we are bad at parenting, or if we're struggling with being a parent, we must be bad parents. Well, yes, you are a bad parent because you've never done it before. So I remember when my first son was maybe 2 years old, and I swore up and down that he hated me. A 2-year-old hates me. Okay, let's start there. Like, I have all this story and talk going on, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my son hates me. Yeah, I'm sure. And I joke about it now, but I genuinely felt this way. Like, he never wanted me. And my energy and how I behaved towards him, I think he felt it, because I ended up asking a friend of mine. I went up to her and I said, I adore your daughter. Her daughter was like 18 years old. I'm like, I want to have kids like yours. Like, is there a book that you can recommend me? Because I'm struggling here. And she goes, well, I've never read any books on parenting, but there's this person who wrote a book that subscribes to the same thing that I believe in. And I said, great. And I read the first chapter and it changed my entire psychology of my son. And it just a light bulb turned on. The very next day after I read that chapter, I look at my son and he's like, Daddy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you do love me. And it was just this aha moment that I would never have had if I hadn't asked for help. To make a long story long, the idea around shame and guilt as a parent really stems from this ideology that we have to be perfect, when that's very much far from the truth. When this is actually the time to ask for help. This is actually the time to say, I am struggling, because then you can get the support, the information to become the parent that you want to be.
Yeah, I love your story. And then the story doesn't end there, right? Because as you talking about your first child, the second child that you talked about, who is also autistic, can you talk about that? Especially when we as parents, when we go out and we have this kid, and when our kids misbehave, we feel like sometimes people are also judging us and labeling us we're not perfect. It goes back to the shame and guilt loop, right? So can you talk more about that?
100%. So my first son is born, everything goes quote unquote relatively well. Second son is born, everything goes relatively well until it doesn't. And during the pandemic, he started showing signs that, things weren't necessarily normal. He didn't have coping mechanisms the way a neurotypical child would. So we have him assessed, and sure enough, he gets diagnosed with autism. Okay, fine. This makes a lot of sense, because as the doctors describe tendencies and behaviors, it's like, wait a minute, this makes total sense why he's behaving the way he's behaving. Okay, interesting. And at the same breath, to your point, his tantrums were tantrums, but he didn't have any coping mechanisms. And the way that he would tantrum would be all out. So, and because of that, when we were in public, obviously we got the looks and the stares. It's like, why don't you control your child type of stares and all the judgments around that? I admit, like, during this time, I didn't want to see my friends, because I was just trying to figure this all out. All my friends had kids, and all of them were very loving. They wanted to help as much as possible. And at the same breath, I could also say that I felt they wouldn't be able to understand. Even friends that were in the field of, occupational therapy and being around special needs children, I felt like they couldn't understand because they didn't have kids. They didn't experience this as a parent. And the most challenging thing to go through as a parent, whether you have neurotypical kids or not, is this idea that you're not understood. It's sort of like when someone's going through a really challenging time, and like, so I'm going through this challenging time, and constantly I would hear, "You're doing great," or "You are so strong." And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, that's very well intended, but you are validating that you have no idea what I'm going through. I understand that you mean well, but that doesn't serve me, because it's like there's an analogy that was given to me. And if you're drowning and people who are on a boat watching you drown saying, "You're doing great, you're so strong, thoughts and prayers," it doesn't help the fact that you feel like you're drowning. And so there's this, wow, I don't belong anywhere. I don't like, they don't understand me. And so I don't belong in this peer group. Again, just being a parent alone, let's just say you're the first parent in a peer group of friends who have no kids. There is a level of understanding and that you have that these, oh, I have dogs, so it's the same thing as having kids. Yeah, that's adorable. Like, so I say all this to say that the shame and guilt and that you experience as a parent is not a bad thing if you acknowledge it. And it's actually, and it can be addressed if you talk about it. Now, the biggest question then is, where do we find space that we can feel safe and that we can feel seen, understood, and we can talk about this and unpack it? And that's the biggest challenge. And in saying that, again, this is also just being a parent. I'm having a hard time managing my life, work, being a spouse, having kids, or being a single parent. I'm having a hard time, and I don't need to hear about how great I am. I actually need help. This is why, again, we're having this conversation. This is such a huge topic because there are so many layers to this that if we don't talk about it, then we are just going to, as parents, suffer in silence and nothing gets resolved. And then that suffering spills over to our kids.